The next step is to learn how to process a supplier invoice. You go to suppliers, transactions, supplier invoices. While it's loading, if you are not sure when to use a supplier for a specific expense, or when to allocate the expense directly to the expense account, let us know. We have a flow diagram that will help you to determine that for each and every single expense. Here you will click on Add Supplier Invoice. You have the option here to choose which supplier. It will give you the tutorial that you can go through if you want to. You can click here on the supplier and then choose an existing supplier, or you can add a new supplier, and it will basically take you to the Add Supplier screen that I've explained to you in the video clip about how to add a new supplier. But we are going to use an existing supplier. The document number is a default document number. Supplier invoice, here you will literally take the invoice number as it appears on the document that they've given you. If you send a purchase order number, you will actually put it in here. You can choose the layout that you want to use. I cannot for the life of me think why you would want to use a different layout for a supplier invoice, but there might be a reason for specific clients. You're going to make sure that the VAT reference number is here. If it's not, go back to the supplier and add it on the supplier. Otherwise, you're going to have to add it for each and every single invoice, which is unnecessary work. The date will default on today's date. However, with a supplier, it is often a very good idea to use the invoice number, as it becomes a lot easier to reconcile the Sage accounting information to the supplier's statement. However, there might be instances where this is not a good idea, but usually we will discuss that with you if you're one of the exceptional cases. If there is a specific supplier discount that is always applicable, this is the discount amount that will show here. You can override that if that is not applicable to this specific invoice. This discount percentage will be applicable on the whole invoice. If, however, they've given you discount only applicable to one line item, you will enter it here. The physical address that you've entered on the supplier will appear here, but again, don't enter this unless you actually need it. Otherwise, it's just unnecessary work. The postal address will appear here from the postal address that you've entered on the supplier. This option is quite important with supplier invoices, as supplier invoices will always be set up or processed in one of two ways. It will either use the inclusive amounts to work from, or it will use the exclusive amounts to work from. So you will make sure that you choose if they use the inclusive processing method, you're going to choose inclusive. If they processed from the exclusive amounts, you're going to use exclusive. Now, it's not always that easy to figure out which one is applicable, but in most instances, if you cannot see the actual excluding price per item on the invoice, they used inclusive processing methods. And if you can see the exclusive price, that's often a good way to then use that method yourself. You can also use the last supplier invoice detail. If you have the same line items and more or less the same invoice, or exactly the same invoice, then you can use the last supplier invoice that you have entered. Right. So the items you are only going to use if it is a cost of sale item. In other words, this is something that you bought to resell to somebody else. If it is not the case, you are not going to use an item. So make sure that you use the correct one. If it's an expense like a telephone or water and electricity, telephone, your mobile phone, anything like that, so that is not linked to a specific purchase, a cost of sales account, do not use the items. It will actually cause a problem on the books, and we will have to go and correct all the invoices, which is zero fun to do. If you do make a mistake or you're not sure, let us know, then we can help you to make the decision. Right, so here you're going to choose the item. So let's say we bought food from this specific supplier. Okay, we're not going to buy food from Playland Gardening Services. So let's see, maybe we bought some veggies. We bought organic veggies from them. So here you can, if you've got specific description that you want to use here, you can override the description that defaults. However, if nobody's actually going to use that description, don't actually take the time to override it. Something that really works well in some instances is if you put the supplier description, so Playland here, and that can sometimes help, because on the general ledger, where you look at, let's say you look at the all the cost of sales for a specific item, then you can see, okay, this is the different service providers or suppliers that we used. So that can sometimes work. But if you're not going to use that information, don't take the time to enter it. The unit, you can we can also change this when you do the item setup. The quantity that we bought, let's say we bought 10 bunches of veggies, and our purchase price, this is the default purchase price that was set up when we did the item setup. Let's say this particular bunch was a little bit more expensive, and it was 12 rand. This is the exact unit price that appears on the invoice. Make sure that your VAT type correspond to the invoice, and let's say on this specific item they've given us a 2.5% discount. The amount, the total exclusive amount, the VAT, the inclusive price will be calculated automatically, and then you can choose that. So let's say we also have delivery costs, and that is a specific account that we haven't set up yet. So we're going to say add new account, and we're going to set up the delivery costs. And we can choose that can also be a cost of sales account. Right, the description will be delivery cost. Again, you can change that to Playland. Then if you pull the delivery costs account, you will be able to see who did you pay the different delivery costs to. And let's say that is a total of 20 rand that we paid, and it will calculate the amounts, and then check two things when you've entered your supplier invoice. The first one is the total of your invoice, that corresponds to the total of the invoice that you have in front of you. And then the second thing that you check is that your total VAT correspond to the invoice VAT. Now, there's sometimes the VAT amount might be out with 2 or 3 cents to this side or that side. That's not an issue. The reason for that would usually be small little differences in how one program calculates VAT towards, how another program calculates VAT. So you sometimes do have those differences, but so you can leave that. But if you have an amount that's significantly different, so let's say the invoice amount is 15 rand on the supplier invoice, and you've got 20 rand, then something with your setup would be wrong. If all the line items are correct and you still have a VAT difference, this is where your problem lies. That you usually use inclusive where they used exclusive, or vice versa. If you struggle to get this sorted out and get on top of it, let me know. Then we can talk you through specific invoices and help you to get to know the situation. Here you can add additional costs. This is where you can actually add the supplier costs if you have that. Although it looks to me as if this does not actually allocate to a specific account. So this is probably for a cost. I'm sorry, I've never seen this before. So you can choose the supplier, and you can then put in the description. So let's say transport costs, and you can then, doesn't look like it, you can override that number. Here you can put the supplier invoice number, and you can put the amount in. I just want to see quickly. You will see that this is not adding to the total of the supplier amount, so or invoice. So these are costs that are associated with this specific invoice, but that this is not something that you are going to allocate as a specific line item. So this is probably for a record keeping purposes or something like that. I've honestly never seen this before. So this is the only reason why I can think why you would actually use this function. But it can be useful for a larger organization, especially if you want to keep track of what costs are associated with a specific invoice, but is not actually shown as a specific line item. So now I've learned something new. Options that you have available for this specific invoice or for any invoice will also always be to email, to print preview, or to print and email. Other options that you have, you can use, if there's invoice history, you can actually go in there. Obviously, this one won't have anything like that. You can use you can show the user-defined fields. You can add attachments to this specific document, maybe like, I'm trying to think now, maybe a purchase order that you sent them, things like that. If you want to have notes about this specific invoice, you can go to the document notes. Not sure where that will show. And if you can indicate here as well how you expect to pay this invoice. So let's say, sorry, let me just wait. Okay, so let's say I anticipate that this payment I'm going to pay, it's today the 18th, and on the 22nd I expect to pay 50% of the amount, pay 50% of invoice amount, and then on the 31st, June only has 30 days, pay remainder of invoice. This you don't want to use for small invoices because that's becoming very labor intensive. But if you have big amounts, so like, let's say you have a bookstore and you have an order for 200,000 rand, and they say, okay, you can pay us 25% at the end of this month, and then another 25% at the end of next month, and then 50% at the end of August. That is typically where you want to use this. That you don't have a little note or a separate schedule, but that you have everything here on Sage Accounting. Then if you want, if you have returns for that specific supplier, you can actually use this to create a supplier return. We're going to show that for you in a separate video. You can create a return and a re-invoice. I will also cover that with the returns. You can create a payment, which you preferably should not use unless you've done a cash payment, and you can copy the invoice. I'm going to show the cash payment. I will also show in a separate video. Then once you're done, you can either save the invoice if you do not need to send this to anybody, and in most instances you will not actually send this to anybody, or you can print preview it and print it from there, or you can email it to somebody if needs be. But in most instances you will only save. If you need to process another invoice, you will actually use save and new. And that is how you create a supplier invoice.